Okay, we are going to start with our 6.7 item. I just want to welcome everybody that's in here. We have full chambers, a lot of engagement in these items, so welcome, and we're glad that you're here with us today. We'll start with 6.7, our 1:15 p.m. item, presentation and discussion regarding Clear Lake Hitch and other fish species by Feyrer, United States Geological Survey, USGS, sponsored by Water Resources. So if you would like to come up and have a seat with us and make your presentation. Oh, and sorry, Scott.
Good afternoon, Board. Scott, can you hear me okay?
Oh, Scott, there's something wrong with your...
You sound like you have bronchitis.
Yeah, to do a virtual throat clear there. Try again.
That's better.
No,
You mean you forward him? Just slide there.
you might have to come and join us.
I'm trying not to. Johanna, you need to slide there?
Oh, where'd he go?
I was told they were.
Is that it? It's already up? Is that what you're looking for?
Is this your presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that was magic.
Okay. Did we hear from Scott already?
We did, but we got scared, so we told him to stop.
All right. Are we ready?
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you for being
Well, thank you very much for having me this afternoon. Happy to be here. I've got about 15 minutes worth of presentation for you, but feel free to stop me and ask questions anytime. So the previous meeting where we covered Clear Lake Hitch, you guys got a lot of background and information on the species itself and its status from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so I'm not going to cover that in much detail here. What I'm going to try to address is some of the other issues that you didn't hear about with regards to Clear Lake Hitch and some of the other fishes in Clear Lake from the work that we've been doing. A couple things that are going to be really important in my talk as it goes on are these two aspects here at the bottom that I want to point out to you. Working.
It's there, it's just on white, so it's hard.
The fact that this fish lives about 5, 6, possibly 7 years old, and it uses a diversity of habitats, as I'm sure you probably know. In addition to the lake, it utilizes tributary streams for spawning, and those are both really important aspects of its life history, as you'll see here in a minute. So next slide, please. All right, so I'm with as Scott was going to mention, I'm with the U.S. Geological Survey's California Water Science Center. We're based out of Sacramento, and we started monitoring Clear Lake Hitch in 2017, and we did this work at the request of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. At the time, they're still considering listing the fish right now, as you know, but they were approaching a time period where they had a listing decision and associated critical habitat designation decisions they need to make, and there was very little information for them to base their decisions on, so they connected with us. USGS is the sister agency of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service within the Department of Interior, and we're the research side of the federal government within Interior. And so we've been monitoring the population since 2017. This is exactly how we do it here. We're typically out on the water the last 2 weeks of June. We'll be out here this coming June again. And we sample the fish. We collect samples of the fish with nets. So we use these nets to sample the fish. The fish occupy a broad array of the available habitat within the lake, everything from very shallow water to very deep water, out open water. And so we have to use these nets to capture them. There's really no other way for us to sample and get observations of these fish. Next slide, please. And so jumping to the punchline here. So this is a plot showing you the trends in the abundance of the fish over the course of our surveys. And what I'm showing you here on the vertical axis in the abundance measure there, that's essentially a catch per unit effort, or the number of fish that we capture on average per net sample with 95% confidence intervals around that. And you can see that in 2017 and 2018, the numbers were much larger than they were in the most recent years. And to give you a little bit of context of the scope of this decline, so when we first started our work in 2017 and 2018, as you can see there, we averaged roughly about 1.5 to 2 fish per sample when we were out on the lake. It's a schooling fish, so we would get a lot of samples with zeros and we'd get some samples with a lot of fish in them, but we would average out to about 2 fish per sample. Fast forward to 2022, we were averaging, well, it took us 30 samples to catch a single fish on average. We only collected 6 total fish in our survey in 2022. And another kind of contextual item there with that is in 2017 and 2018, we would get really large numbers of fish in our samples. We had numbers as high as, we had a couple 60 and 70 counts of fish in a single net sample, and we only caught 6 total in 2022. So the numbers are really way down. The population is not doing well. Next slide, please. Okay, and we don't know exactly what's causing this population decline, but what we do know is that it seems to be associated with what we're calling a recruitment failure. And what I mean by that is that there are essentially no baby fish being born into the population. And so what I'm showing you here on the horizontal axis is the size of the fish, the length of the fish, and on the vertical axis is the number or the count of fish that we collected at that given size for each given year. The vertical line there is the approximate delineation that separates juvenile from adult life stages. And so what you can see there is in the first year, in 2017, there is a relatively large number of juvenile fish in the population. And fast forward to 2018, fewer fish. 2019, even fewer fish. 2021, we didn't get a single juvenile fish into the population. In 2022, we caught 6 total fish and 2 juveniles. So really no numbers of fish in our survey. And the way I like to contextualize this for people is, and Felipe Alous mentioned this a little bit in his presentation last time from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, is so keep in mind that this fish only lives 5, 6, maybe 7 years old. And we are going on 6 to 7 years of no recruitment of this fish. And so to put this in a human context, imagine no babies being born into the human population for probably 50 or 60 years. That would not be a good thing, right? So that's the situation we're facing with Clear Lake Hitch. And so there's a lot of concern that the fish does not have a lot of time left on the landscape if conditions and the situation does not change. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit, very briefly, about some of the things we know about the hitch, the fish in the lake, and then also in the streams as well. So I'm going to start off with the lake, and this is just a very broad brushed slide to kind of show you that what we do know about the fish in the lake is they occupy the entire lake. They're very broadly distributed. You can see, they occupy each one of the arms, both life stages. But there are some critical factors that control the habitat and the distribution of the fish and where we find them when we're out sampling. So next slide, please. So the primary driver by far of where we find fish in the lake and what's driving their habitat and their habitat volume is dissolved oxygen concentration in the water. So when we started our surveys in 2017 and 2018, we learned really quickly that these fish like to live where they can breathe. They need normoxic water. They don't want to live in hypoxic water because it causes them lots of problems. So what I'm showing you here on the left is just a scatter plot of the counts of fish in our samples in hypoxic versus normoxic water. And as you'd expect, the fish are where there's oxygen in the water. And then on the right there is just a few example maps of interpolated habitat volumes in terms of dissolved oxygen concentration. And so, the example there is that in 2017 on the bottom of the lake, there was a large proportion of the lake that was inhospitable to these fish. So it really constrains their distribution where you find them in the lake. Next slide, please. And when those dissolved oxygen lenses on the bottom of the lake work their way up to the surface, that's when we experience these fish kills that everyone here is unfortunately too familiar with. So this is just an example from the fish kill that we had, the last really big one in 2017. And these are some photographs and a quote from that particular news article. And through the work that UC Davis is doing, their limnology work within the lake, we're learning a little bit about what's driving these fish kills in terms of the dissolved oxygen concentrations and how that dynamic works. But that's one of the issues that's clearly affecting Clear Lake Hitch and a lot of the other fish within the lake, not just directly through direct mortality, but also indirectly with water quality issues that causes stress to the fish. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to transition over to a little bit about what we know with what's going on in the streams with the fish. And so on the left here, that's a map, it's a county-generated map that shows the geological diversity within the watershed of the lake. And that diversity in geology translates into unique chemical signatures within the streams of those particular drainages. And fortunately for us as scientists, that chemical signature in the water gets recorded naturally in the fish in their ear bones or their otoliths, which is what I'm showing you here. And we can analyze the chemical composition of those otoliths and kind of take on a kind of an ecological CSI, if you will, and we can reconstruct where these fish have lived and which streams they've been born in. And so we know that they use the entire watershed, not only from visual direct observations from, what the Chi Council and many others have been doing, but we can also look at the natural tags within these fish and find out which streams are supporting successful production. Next slide, please. Okay, if you hit the space bar, the video should play. So I'm going to show you a little video here. If it doesn't actually play, it's okay. What I really want to convey with this particular video is the habitat that these fish are utilizing for spawning. So this is some video of fish spawning in Kelsey Creek in, I think, 2018 or 2019. And the key point here is that these fish are using water that's extremely shallow. So you saw, this is very jumpy, so it's not very smooth to look at right now. But, the water is essentially barely ankle deep here. You can see the backs of these fish out of the water. What's happening here is there's the larger fish in the frame, if you can see them, are females, and there's groups of smaller male fish that are trying to mate with the female, and they do this broadcast spawning on this kind of gravel, cobbly substrate. And the males are trying to get the female to release her eggs, and they want to fertilize those eggs. And this is just an example I wanted to share with you that these fish will utilize extremely shallow water, which makes them pretty vulnerable to the hydrology of the system now. If the water drops down really fast, it could expose eggs that could then get desiccated. And that's what I'm going to show you here in this next photo. So next slide, please. So here's a shot of the eggs in the water. You can see they're broadcast spawners into typically in rocky, kind of cobbly, gravelly substrate. They will utilize anything they can, but this seems to be what they prefer to use. So next slide, please. And it's the context of the habitat they use for spawning is very important with respect to the hydrology of the system in the watershed. So as everybody in this room knows, the hydrology of the watershed here is very flashy and very dynamic. So, we can get very large fluctuations in the amount and the timing of when water is coming down through the streams. And so what I'm showing you here is flow measured at the USGS Kelsey Creek gauge for those same study years that we've been working on the monitoring program. And you can see that, the hydrology, these peaks and flows are really extremely responsive to the storms that we get, especially the atmospheric rivers, as you guys experienced this last winter, where, we'll get a storm and there'll be a big slug of water that comes through the system, and then things drop down quite dramatically. And when we get extremely wet years, such as in 2021, that's a photograph there of the mouth of Adobe Creek. Got similar photographs of Kelsey Creek. Those creeks weren't even accessible to the fish because they were bone dry. Next slide, please. And so if the hydrograph drops too quickly now, what can happen is these eggs that the fish deposit in the shallow water can get exposed to air and they can become desiccated and they will not survive. And this is an example from Adobe Creek in 2018. And what really seems to be going on here that's causing problems like this is the physical habitat in the streams now is altered such that the physical habitat does not really match the hydrology anymore. There's a disconnect between the geomorphology and the flow. And that's what I have for you here in the next slide, please. And this is an example. This is just one example of a situation like that we have in Adobe Creek, and that's the Bell Hill Road crossing. And what this is showing, so this kind of pocket right here, this is where those desiccated eggs were that I showed you a minute ago. So the fish during a flow event were able to get up past the bridge through those culverts and spawn in that really shallow gravel bar there. But that gravel bar there is not natural. It's not supposed to be there. It's there because of that bridge. And there's a lot of other really altered kind of habitat dynamics going on there. And so when the flows came down after that pulse, those eggs got stranded and desiccated. And so there's this disconnect between the physical habitat and the flow that is a noticeable problem for fish in the streams. Okay, next slide, please. Yep. So I'm only going to briefly talk about other fishes in the lake. So again, we've been monitoring the fishes since 2017. It's a very standardized, very rigorous program. So the data are really good. The data are published. I've been including links to all of the data sources and all the publications on every slide, so you can get access to them if you like. So what I'm showing you here is a time series of abundance for Clear Lake Hitch at the top. I've already showed you that one, so you've seen that. That's what I showed you earlier. But then we've got the other fishes that we sample fairly effectively in our monitoring program. A combination of native and non-native fishes. Clear Lake Hitch and Tule Perch are two native fishes. The rest of the species up there have been introduced, and they're very important sport fishes for the system. But to a T, every one of the fishes that we've been sampling since 2017 have been in dramatic decline in their numbers. And so we've been catching very few of these fish over the last several years. And what's particularly striking about this is that these fish up here on the screen, this is a suite of fish that have very different life histories, very different modes of reproduction, very different feeding ecologies. And so there's something going on in the lake. We don't know what it is. There's something going on in the lake that's affecting not only Clear Lake Hitch, but the other species as well. So for example, Tule Perch, Tule Perch is the only freshwater member of the surf perch family, and it actually bears live young. So that's a live bearer. The rest of the species are nesting fish that reproduce in a variety of different ways, but there's factors definitely going on, in the streams that are affecting Clear Lake Hitch, but there are also factors going on within the lake that's also affecting Clear Lake Hitch and these other species. And I don't have a slide for it, but there is evidence in the data that what's affecting all of these species is very similar to Clear Lake Hitch, in that we're seeing a reproductive kind of recruitment failure of all of these species in the lake. So what we're seeing in our monitoring program is fewer and fewer juvenile fish and only adults as time has gone by. And so it's an issue that's caught the attention of a lot of folks, and we're going to be trying to find ways to find some resources to look into what might be driving this. Okay, so I have one last kind of conclusion slide here. So two main points I wanted to share with you that perhaps maybe did not get conveyed in the previous meeting. One with respect to Clear Lake Hitch. We know that the decline is really associated with this recruitment failure. We don't know what's driving the recruitment failure, but what we do know is the particular points in the life stage that it's occurring. So it's occurring some point between when the adults are reproductive and getting ready to spawn to when the juvenile fish a year later actually recruit to our sampling gear. So there's some early life stage mortality factors there that are affecting that. And that's a result of a combination of factors both within the streams and the lake. So there's no silver bullet here. There's no, if we fix the streams or if we fix the lake, it's a combination of these factors. And we don't have the information and the data yet to really understand exactly what those factors are. And then the second point is just re-emphasizing the fact that there's no silver bullet, there's no smoking gun. It's not one particular factor that is driving this. It's a combination of factors that are likely acting synergistically. All right, well, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have questions from the board or comments? What?
Saying public comment, but go ahead.
Supervisor Sabatier?
Just a quick question, seems rhetorical. We're looking at a decline with many things that you just discussed, and you said you don't really know. Obviously, you don't know how long it would take to get the data either in order to ascertain exactly what's going on and then being able to find a solution. Do you have certain amount of data that you're specific, like variables that you're looking for that you hope will provide you those answers, or is it still unknown as to what variables you're looking for?
Yeah, so a good question. So we've kind of initiated a working group of sorts that is comprised of people from the U.S. Geological Survey, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, UC Davis, and others. And in fact, we met just last week, and we are working on developing hypotheses on what might be driving this decline, and associated with that, specific research avenues we can take to try to understand what's driving these declines. What we do know is that there definitely seems to be something that's affecting the early life history stages of these fishes, so that's really where we're going to focus a lot of our effort.
And is this something that's unique to Clear Lake, or are you seeing similar types of issues happening in other lakes?
To the extent that, well, I guess the simple answer is no. We don't. My research group in particular, we don't do a lot of work in other lakes. And so what seems to be happening here actually seems to be pretty, unique to Clear Lake itself.
Is your research properly funded?
We're getting by. It's, we've been on a bit of a shoestring budget with barely enough funding to do the actual monitoring. So we understand the status and trends, but we have not had the funding available to actually understand the mechanisms and the processes that are underlying those status and trends. And so that's one of the things we're hoping to generate with this working group that I discussed earlier a second ago here, is to generate the research questions and the funding through a variety of sources.
Supervisor Green?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for traveling here personally today. Appreciate it very much. Working groups, task forces, commissions, we have a lot of balls in the air. I was just wondering if you can give us a 30-second elevator speech of how USGS kind of came to be the population plotters du jour, and as we segue into this season, which is going to be kind of mission critical. She asked about funding. I'm asking about boots on the ground, what types of rigorous scientific methodology you're using, whether there's opportunities for observational crowdsourced data that would help you do your jobs. So just that. Can you kind of explain the agency's role? I guess DOI, you're part of the Interior Department. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So, there's a lot there. So as I mentioned earlier, we initially got involved at the request of the Fish and Wildlife Service as their sister agency that is the kind of the science arm. And so we've been working very closely, in addition to the agencies and entities I mentioned earlier, we're also working very closely with the tribes locally, especially with Robinson Rancheria. And so we've got a lot of boots on the ground. We are funded to do our surveys, our population surveys. And one thing I didn't mention earlier, when I showed the population abundance slide, is something I want to make sure that you all understand, so that, to manage expectations. So it is very likely that this coming year in our surveys, we're going to get extremely low numbers again, if not a zero with Clear Lake Hitch, because the way our monitoring program works is that it's effective at sampling fish that are 1 year old and older. So what that means is that if this coming spring, conditions stay really good, we have a lot of flow in the streams, there's a lot of production of fish in the streams, and there's a really big year class that's produced, we won't see those fish in our survey until 2024. And so we've been working really closely with a lot of the local folks to get eyes and boots on the ground, looking in the streams for the fish. We're going to be working really closely with the tribes on developing a juvenile fish survey that's going to help us get an eye on what's happening with these earlier life stages. Because right now, everything younger than 1 year of age is a black box for us, because we don't sample that life stage. And so all we know is what happens from age 1 and older.
Supervisor Spatier?
Just one last question. I know you started your study in 2017, hence the data only has 2017. Just curious if there's any other data that you've been able to access prior to 2017, just to see if we've seen a low like that, and then maybe a bounce back, just to kind of get an idea of, is it possible? Is it the worst situation we've seen? Just kind of curious what was before then, because we've experienced droughts. Granted, that may not be the factor that you're talking about specifically, but we've experienced issues with the lake in the past, and just kind of curious what that would have looked like back then.
Yeah, sure. So it's definitely not just a water issue. So we've had really wet years and we've had really dry years since we started the program in 2017. And despite all of that, we've just had continually declining juvenile fish in the monitoring program. There's little bits of data here and there that various entities have generated. So there's a little bit of data from the Department of Fish and Wildlife that we've been able to look at. And there's also some historical data from UC Davis when they've done a fair amount of research up at the lake over the years. And there's a little bit of similar fish data to what we've been collecting from the 1980s. And that's something in our meeting I mentioned that we've had with that working group the other day. We've been discussing getting those data from the professor who has them and looking at them more closely to see what the conditions were like at that point. They're not going to be, it's not going to be a fully apples to apples comparison, but it will be a little bit of data that will help us get a bigger picture of what's going on.
So I'm just curious, the data that you're working with and collecting, is that available to the public, or is it just with your working group? And where is that? Can that be?
Yeah, everything that we've done is publicly available. It's been published. And on every single one of the slides there's a link to the data that was used to generate those particular figures. So there's a repository called the Science-Based Platform that USGS hosts. And all of the data are posted there, publicly available.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'll open it up for public input. So if you would like to come up to the podium and give your name and speak for 3 minutes, I am going to hold my phone up to the microphone when the alarm goes off so we can try and stick to the 3 minutes today. So thank you so much.
Hey, I'm Sarah Ryan with the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians, Environmental Director. I have a couple comments and points that I'd like to make to the board about that previous presentation. The first is that during that working group meeting, it happened with UC Davis just last week. That was the first time that certainly any of the tribes who were present had ever heard that there were problems with the other fish populations in the lake. You have a Fish and Wildlife Advisory Committee. Have they ever been briefed on his data that goes back years, I guess? No, I don't think so. And in the presentations that he's made to the Clear Lake Hitch conservation strategy, that has not come up as well. And so why is it? And it was the same with his data on the juvenile recruitment failure, that came about several years after he had collected that information. And I feel like, when outside scientists, even though they're like the gold standard, when they come and they give information that it's like a shocker, like, wow, why weren't we working on this a long time ago? Why didn't we know about this? Why aren't you presenting it to the Fish and Wildlife Advisory Committee at least, or to the Board of Supervisors, that we have a huge problem in the lake, that all the decline is happening with every single population, including the bass, which the county cares about very deeply because of tourism and, just the money that comes in from that. Why are we just hearing that now? It's really shocking. I'm amazed at that. The other thing is, he said several times that the Clear Lake Hitch there were no babies being born into the population. He has not said it that way before in any of our meetings. He said it's a juvenile recruitment failure, which means sometime in the first year, something is happening. To say not being born into the population, in my opinion, is very manipulative. It sort of sets a stage that maybe it's not happening at all. You don't have to worry about the water use in the creeks. Don't worry about it, because no babies are being born into the population. But as he finally said at the end of this thing, after saying no babies born into the population several times, then he says, as a juvenile recruitment failure at some time during their first year. I feel kind of manipulated by some of his language. The next thing is, he did say that the water they can use water that's extremely shallow, water that is barely ankle deep. Well, I have an email from a local biologist, a fisheries biologist from Robinson. It's Luis Santana. We were having a conversation with him and Fred and Ben Ewing from CDFW about, this video that he's shown at the working group last week and again today, about, kind of intimating that, hey, low water levels are, we don't have to really worry about the water levels in the creek. And actually, the biologists are saying it's a different story, that they actually can't do well.
We're
in
at
that
3
sort of
minutes
thing.
now.
All right. Thank you.
you.
Anyway, I think you need to listen very carefully, because I feel like it's a bit of a manipulated conversation. Thank you.
Okay, next.
Brock Zoller, local farmer and citizen in Lake County since about 1972. Anyway, you said you did, 4 years of data that you had? So 2020 was not included?
Right.
Fish and Wildlife, I gave a presentation at the last session we had here about this topic, and you can get a little bit of it online, but Fish and Wildlife, actually 2020 was the highest number they got in monitoring 2014 to 2022. And I guess they do spawning out in the streams is what they're looking at, and the last couple of years, as you did, were very low. The streams were dry. But actually, the 2020 ahead of that was the highest year they got of all the years they looked at. So if you took that out, actually their data is fairly similar to yours, but that was a pretty good year according to them, and it actually corresponded with following a pretty high rainfall year. So rainfall does seem to have some indication that it is part of the pattern. I wish we had more data from the 76-77 drought, but there were some catches, that the people on the boats made, and they kept track of it, and that was in their lowest level of catches. But there were other years like that also. But I'd like to thank you for what you do, and I'm interested in all the data that I can pick up.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see everybody showed up today. I'm super happy to see that we're moving
Your name?
forward. Oh, sorry, Michael Wagner, citizen of Kelseyville, Lake County. I think it's great that we're here again, trying to sort all of this out, right? Which is long and short of it, ag is coming together with the surrounding community to try and find a solution for what's going on. And I think with what we've seen in presentation today, there is a bigger issue going on here. And I don't think it circumvents the necessity to focus on the Hitch, right? Doesn't mean like now the Hitch are unimportant because there's a bigger issue. But with that, I was hoping maybe you'd be able to explain maybe a little bit and what you are monitoring. You said your work group is monitoring things. Would you mind maybe telling us what it is that you guys are monitoring, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. So what we do, my group does, is we come up to the lake every summer, and we do our sampling to assess the Clear Lake Hitch population. And so we're here for about 2 weeks, typically the last 2 weeks of June. We're out in the water with 2 or 3 boats, and we use those nets to conduct our sampling.
Sure. So, I'm sorry, what I guess I was wondering is if there was like chemical levels that maybe that you were keeping track of. When we say that there's some kind of bigger issue going on, some kind of sampling for things that might be toxic in the water body itself would seem important or pertinent. And so I was wondering if you guys are sampling the water itself or you're just dipping for fish.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. There's a lot we don't know and a lot that we don't particularly do. So my group, we're just the fish.
Okay.
But there are other people who are looking at various other aspects of the environment, yeah.
And do you guys correspond? Meaning you're looking at the fish, are you working with these other groups that are?
Yeah.
monitoring? Yeah. And did you find anything that was evident or like clear from what you're seeing with the fish and what they're seeing in, say, nitrite levels or nitrate levels?
Yeah, there's nothing that's come up like that yet.
Are they tracking the nitrate levels or the nitrite levels?
Well, so I can't speak to it fully because, I'm not, I don't have everything in front of me, but the folks at UC Davis are doing a lot of water quality work. I don't know the extent to which they are measuring and assessing nutrients, but they do a lot of other water quality parameters. And I know that a lot of the folks locally here, including the tribes and the county, also are assessing a lot of these other water quality aspects.
So it would seem like that would be like a really pertinent piece of this big puzzle. Nitrite and nitrate are two different things. Nitrite is extremely toxic for fish, people, everybody. It would seem like that would be a major contributing factor to maybe this collapse of the ecosystem that we're looking at. And so with this being a bigger conversation than just the water and just the fish, bringing up the hydrology of our landscape, if you look at the fires that started from 2015 to now, there's a burn range all the way around us, and we haven't done anything to address the hydrology of the landscape.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Chris McLeod. I sit on Tribal Council for Big Valley Rancheria. You said that there was no juvenile recruitment in 2021 and very few in 2022. In your professional opinion, how many years does the Clear Lake Hitch have left for survival before extinction?
Well, considering the fish only lives about 6 to 7 years, and we are going on that many years of poor recruitment, if things don't turn around, it's not looking good. I can't say definitively, when the fish might get wiped out, so to speak.
Approximately? 2-3 years?
I couldn't say, there might be conditions this year that will produce a really strong year class, and we might kind of, tip the direction of the population growth rate in the other direction, and so things might turn around. If things don't turn around, it could, it's just not a good scene for the Hitch right now.
Okay. So my next question is, you said you started this information in 2017 and you come out in June?
That's right.
So the spawning season is February to May. So we're talking about spawning and the necessity. So who's doing the research on during the spawning?
So the California Department of Fish and Game has done surveys during the spawning season.
But you had some spawning material.
I'm sorry?
You had some spawning material, you showed a video.
Right. Yeah, those were just visual observations of fish, just like any other.
Was that yours or somebody else's?
Oh, I took that.
Okay, thank you. So then also, I just want to point out that the Clearlake hitch was listed in 1980 as a species of special interest. And then in 2014, the state listed it as a threatened species. Here we are in 2023, so we're looking at 43 years of discussions that have been going on about this Clearlake hitch. So his 2017 numbers, I appreciate them. Thank you for bringing them out. But this is something that's been going on for 43 years. So I did hear at the Fish and Game Commission meeting that I attended when we spoke about this, they said we haven't lost a species in 50 years to endangerment, which I applaud. But here we are at 43 years in the making, and still nothing is being done. So I'm fearful that the state and what they list as a threatened species, I don't feel like the state is reaching you guys at your county level in order for you to implement some changes for conservation or to pay attention to this fish. Is there something that you guys can offer as in information on how you work with the state and some implementations that you guys can offer today?
Thank you.
Hi, Elaine Brown, educator. Just real quickly, can they look at pesticides, herbicides, the increase of the hydrilla? When my dog can't swim there certain times of year, I mean, these seem like pretty evident possibilities, and maybe aluminum bromide. And is there a possibility of having hatcheries to save these fish until we can figure this out? And is there funding that the county can provide?
You want to answer the question?
Yeah, sure. I would say that nothing is off the table right now. We want to look at everything. And, in terms of resources, there's not a lot of resources right now, but there is a lot of momentum and a lot of push towards addressing this issue. So fingers crossed, we'll be able to generate and get the funding to do the studies to really find out what the problems are.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Supervisor Spatier?
So there was a question earlier, and I just want to make sure the question doesn't get asked and lost or forgotten. So there's a couple of things I can mention, but I'm going to ask Director De Leon if he can respond. But I know we spoke about it last time, Middle Creek restoration is an important part for dealing with the hitch. We did receive $15 million from the state. That money has slowly been spent. We have to purchase property. There's a process. It's very slow. So slow that it almost takes 6 months, if not longer, for the state to approve our appraisals that we send them, so that then we can offer them to private landowners to purchase those properties in order to eventually get to the part of working with the Army Corps. A lot slower than I would like for it to happen, but that is one way that we are working with the state. Another way, and it was mentioned by Director De Leon, and I hope he can speak to it, was last time we spoke about that the Water Resources Department has attempted to get $10 million worth of projects. There is some indirect relation and some direct relation to the hitch, not necessarily saying this is to save the hitch, but it's to provide restoration to certain areas or to provide rehab or fixes to the lake or the streams in order to provide some assistance. So I'll let him speak on that. And I believe we've been denied every single time since 2015, since it's been listed. And that is not a way the state has helped us, absolutely. I just want to make sure we respond to that question.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Can I add to that also? Since we came on board also, and I think we've had participation from everybody on the Blue Ribbon Committee. Obviously, when we first came on the board, we had talked with our Assembly Member Agar Curry, which she really championed that opportunity. So we know, and those conversations were started on the health of the lake, not just specifically for one species that was in the lake, but obviously the hitch was a conversation too that was had when that was being developed. So bringing in UC Davis, partnering there, and looking at it, the overall health of the lake, because I think it does go hand in hand. We may be looking at species by species, but also understanding that there's a decline off the board. We all know, and each one of us that live here have seen that exacerbated by, just as was said by a constituent sit up, can't take your dog in a certain area, the algae bloom outbreaks, what are we looking at to do? So what you mentioned about the restoration project on the North Shore that's being, I just blew the name right now, Middle Creek Restoration, those are all things that tie together the overall long-term. And this is a long-term game here that we're looking to do, but we are starting to do it. And we see some of these conversations and the one we're going to have today are to really set that stage, to really put the light on it of everybody addressing it. So I just want to bring up the Blue Ribbon Committee that is looking at the oxygenation and the nutrients. Thank you very much. And the nutrients that are getting into the lake. So there is a holistic look at how we're going to approach this thing moving forward to hopefully help every species living, including our communities living around the lake. So I want to say Blue Ribbon Committee too is part of that conversation.
Do you want Director DeLeon to respond?
Scott, did you want to respond to Supervisor Sabatier's point about the grants?
First thing I want to do is check my audio.
Yes, you're much better.
Okay. Well, we, Department of Water Resources, since 2015 have applied for over $9 million, it's about $9.4 million worth of grants on a variety of projects, many of which would have had impacts, positive impacts on the habitat for Hitch. And those $9.4 million worth of projects were all projects that were not selected, and we did not receive any funding. So, the county is certainly trying, and so we will continue to try, and hopefully, and someone said, this whole effort is really shining a spotlight on a number of issues, and perhaps future grant applications will be more successful as a result. So, but Supervisor Sabatier's point is correct. We've applied for that much since 2015.
And that's a total of 18 grants is what I just counted that were denied.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Rebecca Harper, Lake County Farm Bureau. First of all, I just wanted to thank you, Fred, for your presentation. I'll just offer a couple of brief kind of background statements on some things that were brought up. I know nutrient loading and water quality are of huge concern to many community members and organizations. And so I did just want to highlight the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program that operates under the State Water Board. That is a mandatory regulation program that all Lake County growers comply with. So that includes well water monitoring, sampling, all of their pesticide or herbicide applications are recorded, as well as specific in-stream monitoring sites that are analyzed by the Clear Lake Environmental Research Center. So there's some third-party organizations involved as well, and all of that data is reviewed by hydrologists and scientists that work for California State Water Board before it can be approved. So if any one grower, has some red flags maybe per se on their irrigated lands regulatory report, those are followed up on multiple times. So an outcome from the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program is that Clear Lake and the Clear Lake watersheds have actually maintained as the lowest priority as far as nutrient loading, outside nutrient loading. I know we have a lot of internal nutrient loading due to mining and other nutrient sources that are naturally present within the lake, but we've maintained that low priority and we've had no loading offenses in the history of the program, which hasn't happened in any other watershed. So I think that's really important to note. When we talk about water quality and what can be done from an external perspective, I also just wanted to touch on the Blue Ribbon Committee. As Moak mentioned, there's been some push from all organizations involved in that committee since at least I've arrived on the committee to promote connectivity between projects. So I think maybe that's something that the Board of Supervisors could also get behind and recommend to the BRC, is that they are holistically looking at all of the projects presented and making sure that there's connectivity between those projects, especially with regard to projects that benefit the Hitch. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the chambers? Do we have anyone on Zoom?
Yes, we have call-in user 1.
Okay, call in user 1. Please state your name and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Angela Amaral, and I just had a quick question. I wanted to know with regards to the Hitch, has there been any discussion or research on reproduction in a controlled hatchery setting while all these processes play out?
I think we just had that question, but maybe specifically you want to...
Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and answer that specific question directly. The answer is no. It's been discussed quite a bit. There's been a lot of discussion about potentially utilizing hatcheries and artificial propagation and refuge populations to try to ensure that the fish does not go extinct while things are not looking so good right now, but nothing concrete has actually happened.
Okay, thank you.
Next is Philip M.
Okay, I think, am I there?
Yes.
This is Phil Moy. I'm a Lake County resident and a fisheries biologist. Fred, great presentation. Really brought up some very, very interesting points. One quick question. Obviously, this is a multi-agency effort to tackle this. Who is looking at forage? And I mean, both, it could be vertebrate forage, but also forage fish, but also invertebrate forage.
Yeah, that's one of the, thanks for the question, Phil. That's one of the things that we're interested in learning about is the available food supply for these fishes in the lake. And so in terms of Clear Lake Hitch and some of the other zooplanktivorous fish that live in the lake, there's a data set that UC Davis has been compiling since it's only been fairly recently. It's just been a few years now that they've been collecting zooplankton samples in the lake to try to assess zooplankton populations and what that might mean for food supply. But the bottom line is we don't know.
Okay.
Next is Fred Briones.
Yes, hi, my name is Fred Briones, and I'm a tribal member at the Big Valley Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians. And I hunt and I fish, and I'm a traditional basket weaver. My family is originally from Buckingham, but we're forced relocated. And before, long time ago, before the settlers came, our area was known as a place of healing. Our water, our animals, our plants, there was so much medicine, there's so much healing. But now, what has changed within our area? Agriculture came. And now we have this grapes, these vineyards. And may I remind everyone that in the audience, before Bud Light and Coors, Budweiser, alcohol was known to Native people as poison, poison, poison. So now when I see it all around our county, and it shows, look, the graphs, the animals are dying, the land is dying, the trees are gone, there's no more water. Agriculture is changing that all. And you read all the books of Lake County, they talk about what a place of the animals in the water. Why can't we have a future where Lake County is a nature preserve for the birds, for the animals? So, and keep a mandatory lake level where you could ride your boat around again. Now everyone around the lake, your dock is a hazard. The trees growing in front of your beautiful view of the lake is gone now, and the water is being turned into wine. And the death associated with wine. I want to ask that Blue Ribbon Committee, have you ever been to an AA meeting? Because alcohol is not our culture for tribal people. Have you ever been to an AA meeting at the old bowling alley? You should really go. That's the end product of your wine. It causes so much damage. And with your alcohol, we have no more future. Again, it was poison, poison, poison to all our people and our animals. And we've lost. And here, again, they've always tried to take our resources and they use alcohol to swindle us. Alcohol to swindle us. And that's what they're doing right now. We won't even have a future of this lake if we continue to go in this direction of poison. And that was my comment. I yield.
Thank you. Thank you. Who's next?
Next is Lori Montserrat.
Good afternoon. I'm Lori Montserrat with the Office of Environmental Health Hazards Assessment. I'm hopeful that the Board of Supervisors will move to list the Hitch while you're doing these studies rather than wait another 40 years and watch them die. Thank you.
Next is Meg Townsend.
Good afternoon, Fred, Feyrer. This is Margaret Townsend, a senior attorney and freshwater attorney at the Center for Biological Diversity. And I've been working on trying to help protect the Clear Lake Hitch now for a few years. And I appreciate all the work and research that you've done and the data that clearly shows there's a significant problem. Today, too, I learned that it's not just for the Hitch, that there are other fish in Clear Lake that are suffering. But I want to point out the fact that, because other fish are suffering in Clear Lake, it doesn't make what's happening to the Hitch any less important or any less dire. And the threats that are present for the Hitch are no less real because other fish are also suffering from similar abundance trends. So I want to make that point, and also the fact that, when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service declined to list the Hitch in 2020, one of its stated reasons for denial of listing under the Federal Endangered Species Act was because it could survive and spawn in the lake. And here today we're hearing that conditions in the lake are so poor that all of the treasured fishes in Lake County are in serious peril. So I really hope that the county pays attention to this issue, recognizing the serious emergency that is facing the Clear Lake Hitch and, really the water that everybody in Lake County depends on for survival, including the fish. Thank you.
Next is Haji Wharf.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Haji Wharf from Upper Lake. I would like to focus on one obvious contributing factor to the decline of the Hitch. As a stakeholder with 20 acres of ag-zoned land near waterways in Upper Lake, I strongly support putting meters on all domestic and ag wells immediately. Testimonies of individuals who claim their withdrawal from our shared water basin has negligible effects on surface water is noted, but hundreds of straws simultaneously sucking on our aquifers does cause a rapid depletion. That's just common sense. Both Mendocino and Sonoma counties have some form of well monitoring, even though they don't have an imminent extinction event like we do in Lake County. Water is a finite resource, and to have wells and diversions freely taking without quantifying the data is negligence at best and wanton corruption at worst, especially if the unprincipled practice is allowed to continue unchecked. Resisting genuine accountability enables the largest users to continue obfuscating and cloaking the truth of their impact with dire consequences. Operating in the shadows of the intentionally unknown allows plausible deniability while using smoke and mirrors to deflect and blame many myriad of reasons for the creeks going dry. Until we know for certain the true impact of ag water use, which accounts for 80% of all human use, we will remain in limbo, pointing fingers instead of solving problems. Who knows? Ag use could account for 95% or 5% of the cause for low water levels in our waterways. But not knowing seems to serve their purpose more than taking responsibility. The hitch is the fish version of a canary in the coal mine, as others have alluded. Something is clearly wrong. The detrimental effects of our collective irresponsibility have led to their precipitous decline. Without man, the creeks likely would be teeming with hitch. Each of us needs to be responsible stewards of the land and all of its inhabitants, not just cheerleaders of the short-term economic interests. The legacy this would leave in the wake of your inaction will be another permanent stain on this county's record of moral deficiency. Thank you for your time.
And that is the last hand on Zoom.
Okay, anyone else in the chambers? Come on up.
Hello, my name is Patricia Franklin, and I'm from Scotts Valley Band of Pomo Indians. And I just wanted to share a little bit about how important the hitch is. I'm sure you've heard people say this, but I want to make sure that my voice is heard. You know, recently I conducted a survey among our tribal elders, and it was for basketry materials. I'm a basket weaver as well. But what the common answer among our elders was that how important the hitch were. You know, even though we were talking about basket materials, it always went back to the hitch. And, you know, you could just really feel that joyous feeling that they had when they talked about the hitch, you know, about going out during that season and gathering together with the families and making sure, you know, to do that, to take care of their families and the community. And I just think it's really important. I know it's important to our tribes. And I know that something needs to be done right away. We can't wait. We can't wait. If we wait, this might be the last year. And I'm asking you to please do something about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then we will close, close public input and bring it back to the board. Supervisor Green?
Yeah, just once again, I wanted to thank you, Fred, for coming out. I know it was a long trip and a lot of data to digest. This was an informational item. We will take up another item right after this, where we're going to hear some more about your concerns about the hitch. I just want to, on top of thanking you, I want to caution people, data is just a tool. Data gaps have been noted by multiple people multiple times. We're going to talk more about it during the next item. But this is where we begin those discussions. This isn't where we end them. So if we have not, prior to today, heard some of the things that we did here today in this presentation, I hope people will not take it as any concerted effort to skew the data or take it in directions that is anything less than fully transparent. Sometimes data happens because we start asking questions. And I think we can all agree in this room that we have many questions and that we're going to need more data moving forward. So rather than looking at this latest revision of the data as something, anything other than shocking for what it is, but in that sense of shock, it is not, in my sense, deficient or lacking transparency in any way. I believe it results from the good faith efforts of our state and federal partners, and I certainly look forward to hearing more information from them as we proceed through this.
Anybody else? Okay, then we'll close this item. I think we should take a 10-minute break, 5-minute break. What do we need? 5? Okay.
I mean, I don't need a break, but if you're going to ask for a break.
Well, yeah, okay. Let's do 5. Let's do a quick break before we get started on item 6.8. So we'll come back at 3:10.